Esther Coe was 19, and she kept 4 hens on a strip of ground behind a rented cottage in Wrenholt. She had almost nothing. A dirt floor, a leaking thatch, 4 brown hens with names she never told anybody, and yet every Friday one of her 4 eggs went to a windowsill that was not hers. She never told a soul. She never asked for thanks. The following Friday, a penny sat where the egg had been, the same worn penny, a hole bored clean through it, and it came back every single week for 2 years. 104 Fridays, never once spent. That, said Mr. Peel, the curate, is exactly the sort of heathen nonsense the parish must not encourage. But Esther could see the old woman's hands through the glass. Knotted, twisted, unmoving, she could not reach the sill. So the old woman was not the one leaving the coin. Someone else came before dawn. Someone nobody could name. If the kindest thing anyone ever did for you was one nobody was ever allowed to name out loud, this story is for you. Before we go on, do me one small kindness of your own. Subscribe so these forgotten stories keep finding you, and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? I read every one. Now, back to Wrenholt, and back to the beginning. It was autumn, in the year 1871. Norfolk, where the wind comes off the flat land and does not stop for anybody. Wrenholt was a small place, a church, a green, a dozen cottages leaning on one another like tired men, and on the far edge, past the last of them, a low run of rented ground where Esther Coe lived alone. She was an orphan. Her mother had gone when she was small, and her father the winter she turned 16, coughing his lungs out in the same bed she now slept in. She had no people left, no brother to lean on, no aunt to take her in, just the cottage and the strip of grass behind it, and a rent of £3.10 a year due at Michaelmas that she had to find or lose the roof. £3.10. It does not sound like much now. To Esther, it was a mountain she climbed 12 months at a time. She had 4 hens. That was the whole of her fortune. 4 brown hens that scratched the dirt and laid, most mornings, 4 eggs. On Thursdays she carried them to market in a basket lined with straw, and she stood in the cold with the older women, and she sold what she could. A few pence here, a few pence there. Enough if she was careful, and she was always careful, to keep the mountain from falling on her. That was Esther's whole life. Rise before light, feed the hens, gather the eggs, count the pence, keep to herself, never ask, never owe. She had a horror of owing. She had seen what owing did to people. It put them onto the parish rolls and onto outdoor relief, and it made them small in the eyes of every man who signed the ledger. Esther would sooner have gone hungry, and often did, than let anybody in Wrenholt call her a burden. So you would think a girl like that would keep every egg for herself, every last one, and for a long while she did. Then, one Thursday at market, she heard the women talking. They were talking about old Tabitha Merrow. Esther knew the name the way you know a name in a small place, the way you know the church bell without ever having climbed to see it. Tabitha Merrow lived half a mile off, in the parish almshouse. An old woman, very old, they said, past 70, and failing. She had walked to market once, the women said, every week, for years, on 2 sticks, slow as a snail in frost, but not any more. Her legs had gone, her hands had gone worse. All twisted up, the fingers curled in on themselves like dry leaves, so she could not so much as hold a cup without help. She could not walk the half-mile, she could not carry a basket, she could not come to market at all. And she lived, they said, on outdoor relief. £0.5 a crown a week, 2 shillings and 6pence. That was the whole of it. 2 shillings and 6pence to eat, to warm herself, to be alive on, week after week, in a stone room at the end of the Almshouse row. Esther stood there with her basket and did the sum without meaning to. 2 shillings and 6pence. £0.5 a crown. It was not so very much more than she scraped herself. But she had 4 hens and 2 young legs, and this old woman had neither. This old woman could not even carry herself to the place where food was sold. She did not say anything at market. She never said much at market. But it stayed with her all the way home, down the rutted lane, with the wind pushing at her shawl. It stayed with her while she fed the hens. It stayed with her that night, in the dark, in her father's old bed. An old woman who could not reach the market. And 4 hens that laid 4 eggs. The next morning was a Friday. Esther gathered her 4 eggs, as she always did, and then she stood a long moment in the cold of the yard, 1 warm egg in her palm, and she made up her mind about a thing she would never afterward be able to explain, not even to herself. She wrapped that 1 egg in a scrap of clean rag. She put it in her apron pocket, and she walked the half-mile to the almshouse before the village was properly awake. She did not go to the door. That was the whole of it, you see. She did not knock. She did not want to be seen, or thanked, or talked of. She only wanted the old woman to have the egg. So she went round the side to where the low windows looked out on the weeds, and she found the one the women had spoken of. Tabitha Merrow's window, with its cracked pane and its sill worn smooth by weather, and through the glass, in the grey light, she saw her. An old woman in a chair by a cold grate, small as a child under a heap of shawls. Her face turned toward the window, though her eyes, Esther could tell even from outside, did not truly see. And her hands. Her hands lay in her lap where somebody had folded them, the fingers all drawn in and knotted, still as 2 dead birds. Esther's throat went tight. She set the egg on the sill, careful, upright, in its little nest of rag where it would not roll. And then she turned and walked away fast, before the old woman could turn her head, before anybody in the almshouse could come out and ask her business. She told no one, not the women at market, not a living soul. It was hers, that egg, and now it was the old woman's, and it was nobody else's affair. The next Friday she did it again, and the Friday after that. It became the shape of her week. 6 days she was a hard, careful girl who owed nobody and asked nothing, and on the 7th, before light, she was something else, something she had no word for, walking half a mile in the frost to set 1 egg on a stranger's sill and walk away unseen. She never expected anything back. That is the thing you must understand before the rest of it makes any sense at all. She did not do it to be paid. She did not do it to be thanked. She would have been ashamed to be thanked. She did it because an old woman could not reach the market, and she could, and that was all. Which is why on the 4th or 5th Friday she lost count later, and it plagued her that she had lost count. She stopped dead in the weeds under the window and stared at the sill and could not make sense of what she saw. The egg was gone. That was right. That was as it should be. Somebody in the almshouse took it in for the old woman, she supposed, and that was good. But something was there in its place. A penny. It sat in the very middle of the warnstone, exactly where the egg had been, as if it had been set there with great care by somebody who wanted it found. An old penny, dark with handling, and through it, near the top, a small hole, bored clean through the copper, neat and round, as though somebody had once meant to hang it on a string. Esther picked it up. It was cold. It was light. It was, she saw, quite spoilt. A coin with a hole through it was no good to anybody. You could not spend it. No trader would take it. It was only a penny, and a spoilt one at that. Her first feeling was not wonder. Her first feeling was shame. The old woman thought she was being paid. That was what Esther understood, standing there in the cold with the holed penny in her fist. This poor creature on half a crown a week thought that the egg on her sill was a thing she must pay for, and had scraped together the only coin she could spare, a ruined one, a worthless one, and had somehow got somebody to set it out for her, so as not to be in Esther's debt. Esther could not bear it. She, who could not bear to owe anybody, understood that pride in another at once, and it went through her like cold water. She would not take the old woman's penny. She would sooner have cut off her own hand. So she put the penny in her apron, and the next Friday she brought 2 things to the Sill: her egg, wrapped in its rag, and the penny, which she set down beside it, plain as day, so that whoever took it in would understand, no payment. It is a gift. Take the egg and keep your coin. Then she walked home, satisfied that she had settled the matter. She had not settled the matter. The next Friday, the egg was gone again, and the penny was back. The same penny, the same dark copper, the same neat hole, sitting in the middle of the Sill, waiting for her. She returned it. It came back. She returned it again. It came back again. Week on week, all through that hard winter, the 2 of them carried on their silent argument across a window-sill. Esther left the egg and returned the coin, and by the following Friday the coin was there once more, set out with the same strange care, in the same worn place. She spent nothing. She gained nothing. The penny went back and forth, and never once left her hand richer or poorer than before. And somewhere in that winter, with the frost hard on the weeds and her breath white in the black morning, Esther understood the first true thing about the penny. It was not payment. If it were payment, it would have stayed spent. Money that is given moves on. It buys bread, it pays rent, it changes hands and is gone. But this penny would not go. She had pressed it back, over and over, and every time it returned to her, patient as the moon. A thing that will not be spent is not money at all. It was being said to her. She did not know by whom. She did not know what it meant. But she knew, the way you know a thing in your chest before your head has the words for it, that the penny was a message, that somebody was answering her. Egg for penny. Penny for egg, a conversation with no voice in it, week after week, in the dark. She might have gone on like that a long while, content not to understand, if the village had let her be. But small places do not let you be. And by the turn of the year, Wrenholt had found her out. It was the Almshouse folk, most likely, who let it slip, the other paupers who saw the egg come and the penny go, and made a tale of it, the way people will. A charm, they called it, the Friday penny, a bit of old magic at the Almshouse, egg and coin, coin and egg, and who was leaving it and what did it mean? And wasn't it strange, and wasn't it a sign? It should have stayed a bit of harmless talk. It would have, but for the curate. Mr. Peel was a young man in a hurry. He had come to Wrenholt to make a name, and there is no faster way for a certain kind of man to make a name than to find a sin and stamp on it in public. He heard the talk of the Friday penny, and he did not hear a kindness in it. He heard superstition. He heard the old dark country under his clean new parish, the well-dressings and the charms and the folk who touched wood and threw salt, and he made up his mind to root it out where everyone could see him do it. He chose market day. Of course he did. He wanted a crowd. Esther was there with her basket, standing in her usual place among the older women, when she heard her own trouble begin. Mr. Peel had come out onto the church step, above the market, and he had begun to preach, not in the church, where a man preaches to the willing, on the step, over the stalls, to everybody, willing or not. There is a heathen nonsense abroad in this parish, he said, and his voice carried, thin and hard over the noise of the market, so that heads turned and the haggling stopped. A coin passed in secret at the Almshouse. A charm. A superstition. The sort of thing our grandmothers might be forgiven, but that we, who have the light, must not encourage. I will not have it. The parish must not encourage it. Esther stood very still with her basket. She had gone cold all over. And I will say another thing, Mr. Peel went on, warming to it, feeling the crowd on him. Coin passing in secret at the almshouse is not only foolish, it is a matter for the guardians. We keep the poor of this parish out of the rates, out of the money of honest working men. And when there is coin moving at the almshouse that nobody will account for, money coming in, money going out, and no one to say from where, then I ask you, is that woman as poor as she claims? And is the one who feeds her as needy as she lets on? These are questions the board will wish to ask. Nobody looked at Esther. That was almost the worst of it. Nobody knew yet that it was her. But she knew. She stood among her neighbours with a basket of eggs on her arm and heard a man tell the whole market that the thing she had done in the dark, the one soft thing in her hard year, was a fraud and a heathen charm and a matter for the Board of Guardians. She did not defend herself. How could she? To speak up was to say it was me, and to say it was me was to be exactly what he warned them of, a smallholder with means enough to give charity, a girl not so poor as she seemed. Peel had, in one breath, put both of them in danger. Her for seeming comfortable, and the old woman for seeming to receive money she had not declared. Esther went home that day with her eggs unsold. She could not have stood there another minute. And that night, in her father's bed, she understood the second true thing about the penny. It was not just a message anymore. It was evidence. Because here is what she learned in the cold weeks that followed, listening at market with her head down, saying nothing. The Board of Guardians would sit at Lady Day, the 25th of March, to go over the relief rolls. Edmund Vane, the landowner, chaired it, and the board did two things at that sitting, every year, without mercy. It struck off any pauper found to have means, any old soul on relief who was seen to have money coming in, a coin here, a coin there, anything unaccounted, lost their half-crown. Just like that. Off the roll. Left with nothing. And it took note of any smallholder or cottager who was seen to be giving charity about the parish, because a person who can give must have to spare, and a person who has to spare has no call on the rates, and might, if they ever fell on hard times, be told to shift for themselves. Do you see the trap now? Do you see how tight it had drawn while Esther thought she was only being kind? The penny that went back and forth between them, week on week, endangered the very woman it was meant to comfort. If Peel carried his tale to the board, a coin moving at the almshouse, month on month, never spent, never explained, then old Tabitha Merrow could lose her half-crown for seeming to have money. And Esther could be marked as a girl with means to give away, on the day she could least afford to be noticed, with the Michaelmas rent barely met and the next year's mountain already rising. The kindness had become a danger, the gift had grown teeth. And there were weeks now, only weeks, until Lady Day. Esther made a decision, not a clever one. She was not a clever girl, not in the way Peel was clever, all show and public words. She simply resolved that she would understand the penny before the curate could turn it into a rope. She would learn what it truly was and who truly sent it, so that when the question came, as she now knew it would come, there would be a true answer to give, and not just a charm and a whisper for a grasping man to hang them with. So she began, that hard end of winter, to pay closer heed than she ever had, and the Sill began to answer her. It was one Friday, a bitter one with the frost lying white and unbroken over the almshouse weeds, that she saw the first thing she was not meant to see. She came round the side of the building in the black before dawn, her egg in her pocket, and there was the penny in its place, as ever. But this time the frost told a story around it. There were prints in the white. Boot prints, and Esther, who knew every kind of foot in Wrenholt, knew at once these were nothing from the almshouse, not a pauper's broken pattens, not a matron's heavy tread, not the flat drag of an old woman's stick. These were narrow, small, the clean, sharp print of a fine woman's boot, the kind that cost more than Esther's whole year, pressed neat into the frost, right up to the sill and away again. She stood there with her heart going hard. A fine woman. Somebody with money, real money, kid leather boot money, had come to this Sill in the dark before her and set out the hold penny and gone. Not a pauper at all. Not the old woman. Somebody else entirely, from another world than the Almshouse, creeping to a cracked window before light. She could make no sense of it. A lady, leaving a spoilt penny for a pauper. It was upside down. It was mad. She needed to be sure of the one thing she could be sure of. So, the next Thursday, she did not go to Wrenholt market. She rose in the dark, took the hold penny in her fist, and walked the long road to Norwich, to the great market there, where the traders were sharp and would take anything that could be spent. She held it out at stall after stall. She offered it plainly, as a penny, for the smallest things, a needle, a twist of thread, a bit of bread. And not one trader would look at it twice. They saw the hole and they waved her off. A coin holed through was not a coin at all, they told her, some kind, some not. It was spoilt, ruined. You could hang it on a string for a child, or throw it in the river for luck. But you could not buy so much as a crust with it. It was not money. Esther walked the long road home in the dark with the useless penny warm in her hand, and by the time she saw the lights of Wrenholt she was weeping, quietly, the way she did everything, and she could not fully have told you why. Because it undid everything. 2 years, near enough 2 years now, she had believed the penny was payment. A proud old woman settling a debt, and it had never been payment at all. It could not be. It was worth nothing. It had been worth nothing from the very first Friday, which meant the old woman, or whoever came in her name, had never once been paying for the egg. They had been answering it. Somebody, some fine woman in kid leather boots, had walked to a pauper's window in the dark, week after week for 2 years, and left a coin that could buy nothing in exchange for an egg that asked nothing. Not a trade, not a payment. A thing said back. Esther had reached out one small silent kindness into the dark, and something in the dark had reached back, and neither of them had ever once used a word. She could not eat that night. She sat by her own cold grate, with the 4 hens gone to roost, and the penny in her open palm, turning it over and over in the last of the firelight, this dark, worn, worthless, priceless thing, and she knew that she would have no peace, not ever, not for a single Friday more, until she saw, with her own eyes, who came. She would not go to Peel. That much she had settled in her bones. She would not scheme, or set a trap, or tell the board, or use what she found to save her own skin. It was not hers to use. Whatever moved between that window and that sill was a thing so private that it had never once been spoken aloud in 2 years, and Esther Coe was not the girl to be the first to speak it. But she would see. She had earned that much, surely 2 years of Fridays, and a long road to Norwich, and a marketplace of shame. She would only see. And then she would decide what a person owed to a secret that was never meant for her. So on the next Friday she did not come at her usual hour. She came earlier, much earlier, in the dead black middle of the night, hours before her egg was due, and she did not go to the Sill at all. She crossed the lane instead. There was a churchyard opposite the Almshouse, the old graves leaning in the dark, and a low wall and the black shapes of 2 yews. Esther Coe knelt down behind the wall among the dead, in the killing cold, with her egg still in her pocket and her breath held tight in her chest, and she waited, with her eyes fixed on that pale, worn sill across the way. She did not know who she was waiting for. She did not know that the answer, when it came walking out of the fog before dawn, would tie the poorest woman in the parish to the most powerful, or that the coin in her pocket had last been whole in the hand of a girl giving away a child 32 years before Esther was ever born. She only knew that somewhere out in the dark a fine boot was already turning toward the Almshouse, and that this Friday, for the first time in 2 years, she would not look away. The fog came first. It came up out of the low ground by the beck and lay across the lane like spilt milk, and it swallowed the Almshouse wall, and then the sill, and then the 2 yews above her, until Esther could see nothing but the grey of it, and her own breath going up into the grey. She had been kneeling so long her knees had stopped hurting. That frightened her more than the cold did. Cold you could feel. This was the cold that stops feeling. She waited. Somewhere a long way off a dog barked once and gave it up. The frost crept along the top of the wall under her fingers. And then, without a sound she could name as a sound, the fog by the sill thickened and moved. A shape. It knelt. It was there, and it was gone, quick as a held breath, and by the time Esther had got her frozen legs under her and risen up to look, there was only the sill again, pale and empty, and the fog closing over the place where the shape had been. She crossed the lane. Her legs did not want to carry her. On the sill, where her egg was not yet due, sat the penny. The same penny. The hole bored clean through it, dark and worn, catching what little light there was. Esther did not touch it. She stood over it a long moment. Then she went home, and she did not sleep, and she thought, a veil. It had worn a veil. She came again the next Friday. Earlier still. This time the fog stayed down in the beck where it belonged, and the sky over the Almshouse was that hard clear black that comes before a frost, with a pairing of moon low in it. Esther knelt behind the wall among the leaning stones, and she kept her eyes open until they streamed. She heard the boots before she saw anything. Not the flat drag of a pauper's pattern. Not clogs. A firm, even step, heel first. The step of a person who has never in her life had to be quiet about walking. It came down the lane, and it stopped at the sill. Esther lifted her head above the wall by an inch. A woman, tall, in a good travelling cloak that fell without a patch or a mend in it. She stooped to the sill, and as she stooped the moon caught her hands, and Esther saw that they were gloved in pale kid leather, soft and close, the kind of glove that costs more than Esther's 4 hens together. No mittens, no knotted, crippled fingers, a lady's hands, whole and quick. One of them set something small on the sill. Then the woman straightened and drew her veil down closer and turned and walked back the way she had come with that same unhurried tread, and the dark took her. Esther knelt on among the dead until the sky greyed. A lady in kid gloves and good boots, coming half a mile before dawn to a pauper's window, week upon week, for 2 years, to leave a coin that no shop in Norfolk would take. It made no sense. It made less sense the longer she looked at it, and there was no one on this earth she could ask. Except, perhaps, one, Mrs. Suckling kept the Almshouse, and Mrs. Suckling had a soft spot for the girl who never made trouble. Esther went to her that same week on a plain errand of returning a borrowed pail, and she stayed talking by the copper while the water heated, and by, careful as stepping on ice, she brought the talk round to old Tabitha. How long had she been in the house? Had she people? Had she ever had people? Mrs. Suckling wrung out a cloth and did not look up. She had a child, she said. Long since. You'll not have it from me, mind, for it's not spoke of. Before ever she came to the parish, when she was a girl no older than you, she had a child and no ring on her hand to show for it, a daughter. She wrung the cloth again, though it was dry. Folk of some means took the babe to raise as their own. Better than the workhouse, they said, and maybe it was. Tabitha never saw the child after. Nobody knew what became of her, whether she lived or died, whether she was told or never told. That were 1839, girl, 32 years gone, near enough, long before you were ever thought of. And Tabitha gave her nothing to remember her by? Esther said. Her voice came out very small. Mrs. Suckling was quiet a moment. There was a story, she said, that she'd only the 1 penny to her name, and she bored a hole in it herself with a nail and put it round the babe's neck on a thread. So the child would carry something of her mother, whatever house she grew in. A poor thing to give. It was all she had. She looked up then, sharp. "Why do you ask me this?" "No reason," said Esther. "Only she's kind to me." She walked home under a white sky, and she could not feel the road under her feet. 32 years. A penny bored through with a nail, a daughter given to people of means, carried off God knew where, told or not told. And every Friday for 2 years a lady in kid gloves came before dawn and set that same holed penny on the sill of the poorest woman in the parish, and went away without a word. It was not payment. Esther had known that since Norwich. But now she knew what it was. It was an answer. It was the only word the two of them were allowed. The daughter could not knock on that door. She could not speak that woman's name, nor own it, nor be seen within a mile of her. But she could come in the dark and lay down the one thing that had ever passed between them, the penny with the hole in it, and it said all it needed to say. I have it still. I kept it. I am here. And Tabitha, near blind, her hands too knotted to reach the glass, Tabitha could not answer back, except that the penny went and came, carried by an egg girl who thought she was only being neighbourly. 2 years. 104 Fridays, and Esther had been standing in the middle of it the whole time and never seen it. She had to know the face. She told herself it was to be sure. It was not to be sure. It was because a thing that large could not be left half seen. She kept the third vigil the very next Friday, and this time she came so early that the frost had not yet set, and she found herself a place at the churchyard wall, not behind it, but at a broken part of it, where a stone had fallen out, so that she could see the sill straight and near, without lifting her head at all. The lady came in the grey. The light was just enough to grey the world, and no more, colourless, the hour that is neither night nor morning. The even stepped down the lane. The stoop at the sill, and then, because there was no fog this time, and no one living to see her but the girl she did not know was watching, the lady reached up with both kid-gloved hands and lifted her veil back off her face to look. Just once, plainly, at the window where an old woman slept who did not know she was loved. Esther knew the face. She had seen it 3 times in her life, twice from the back of the church, in the good pew, in a bonnet that cost more than the rent. Once at the Thursday market when the fine folk came through and the crowd made way. It was the face of Mrs. Vane, Mrs. Honoria Vane, of the big house, wife of Mr. Edmund Vane, who owned half the land Esther's cottage stood on, Mr. Edmund Vane, who sat at the head of the Board of Guardians, who would sit at Lady Day, the 25th of March, and strike the names of any pauper with means from the relief rolls. The pauper in the Almshouse was the Guardian's wife's mother. Esther's mind went down it like water going down steps. If it were known, if it were so much as whispered, that Mrs. Vane of the big house was the base-born daughter of a nameless pauper woman on the parish, it would end her. Her marriage, her name, her place at that man's table. And in the same breath it would end Tabitha, for a woman whose daughter had married into land would be judged to have people who could keep her, and she would lose her £0.50 a week, her 2 shillings and 6pence, the whole of what stood between her and the workhouse. The one truth would destroy them both at a single stroke. That was why it had never been spoken. That was why it never could be. There was no version of the word said aloud that did not kill someone. So it was never said. It was only ever a penny, moving in the dark. The 2 women looked at one another across 6 graves and the grey air, for Honoria Vane had heard the frost crunch, or felt the way one feels a watcher, and had turned, veil back, and found the egg girl of Wrenholt kneeling at the broken wall with her whole understanding plain on her face. Neither of them screamed. Neither ran. That was the strangest thing, and Esther remembered it all her life. They only looked, a long, still looking, the length of a slow 10 count, the pauper's daughter and the girl who had carried the pennies without knowing what she carried. And in that look the whole thing passed between them and was agreed, without a word, the way the whole thing had always passed without a word. Then Honoria Vane came across the frozen ground. She came to the wall and she stood over Esther, and up close her face was not proud at all. It was tired past its years, and afraid, and something else that Esther had no name for then, and understood only later, when she was older. She spoke low. She spoke once. "You know her," Esther whispered. "She's your." "Don't." The lady's gloved hand lifted, not to strike, only to stop the word in the air. "Don't say it. Not you, not me, not ever." She looked back at the dark window. When she spoke again, it was so quiet, Esther felt it more than heard it. "I could leave her a penny," she said. "I could not leave her a name." And that was all. That was the whole of it, the only words that ever crossed between them about the thing itself. Esther found her own voice. "I've kept it 2 years and never told a soul," she said. "I didn't even know what it was. I'll keep leaving the egg. I'll keep my mouth shut till I die. You have my word." Honoria Vane looked at her a long moment. Then she nodded, once the way great folk nod, and drew her veil down, and walked away up the lane, heel first, unhurried, a guardian's wife who had been seeing to the parish poor. And Esther knelt at the wall until she could feel her hands again, and then she went and left her egg, and took the penny exactly as she had done 104 times before. Because that was the covenant, and the covenant held. It might have held forever. It did not, because Mr. Peel would not let it lie. He had said his piece from the church step and been made to feel clever, and cleverness of that kind wants feeding. He had brooded on the Friday penny all through the black end of winter. Coin passing at the Almshouse that no one would account for. Undeclared income. A pauper on the parish taking money in secret. It offended everything in him, and it promised to make him noticed by the men who mattered, and so, 11 days before Lady Day, the Reverend Mr. Peel went to Mr. Edmund Vane with his suspicion dressed up as duty, and laid before the board that there was concealed money moving to Tabitha Merrow, and asked that her relief be reviewed and an inquiry be held before the rolls were struck. An inquiry was ordered. It would sit the week of Lady Day, and Esther, hearing it at the market from 3 separate mouths, felt the ground tilt under her, because she alone in all the world knew what an inquiry might turn up if it pulled hard enough on that thread. Not concealed money. There was no money. There was only a penny no shop would take. But an inquiry asks who leaves it, and that question, followed home, ended at a face in the good pew. In the same week, old Tabitha took to her bed. Mrs. Suckling sent the word down. The old woman was failing. She had gone very quiet, and would not eat, and lay with her ruined hands folded on the coverlet, and her blind eyes turned to the window as if she were waiting on something. Esther went and sat with her one evening in the last of it. She did not know what to say, so she said little. She held one of the knotted hands very gently, careful of the swollen joints, and she told her the hens were laying well, and that it had been a hard frost, but the days were turning. And once, near the end, Tabitha turned her head on the pillow and said, to no one, to the window, Friday, and smiled, as though Friday were a person she was glad to see coming. She died in the night, 2 days before the inquiry could sit. The parish clock had not yet struck 4 when Mrs. Suckling found her gone cold and peaceful, her face to the glass. And on the Friday that followed, the first Friday in 2 years that there was no old woman to leave an egg for, Esther walked up in the grey out of habit and grief, with her egg in her pocket, not knowing what else a body was to do with a Friday. and the sill was not empty. The penny was there. But it was not the penny as it had always been, bare and worn and waiting to be carried back. Someone had come in the last dark before dawn, one final time, and threaded the whole penny onto a length of plain ribbon, and laid it on the sill coiled round itself like something meant to be worn, and beside it, folded very small against the cold, was a scrap of good paper. Esther unfolded it with shaking fingers. 2 words in a fine schooled hand, the only 2 words that had ever been allowed to leave that silence. "Thank you." Esther stood at the sill of a dead woman with a penny on a ribbon in her hand, and she wept, at last, for all of it, for Tabitha, and for the girl in 1839, and for the lady in kid gloves who had come one time too many to say a thing she was never permitted to say. Then she put the ribbon round her own neck, under her collar, where no one would see it, and she took the paper home and kept it in the bottom of her box, and she told no one. She had given her word. They buried Tabitha Merrow in the corner of Wrenholt churchyard, where the parish buries the poor, on a raw morning with the ground still hard. There was no stone. Mr. Peel read the service in his flat, hurrying voice, plainly put out that the woman had had the discourtesy to die before he could catch her out. A handful of Almshouse folk came, and Mrs. Suckling, and Esther among the ordinary mourners with her collar buttoned high. And Mrs. Honoria Vane came. She came, as her station allowed and no further, as a guardian's wife seeing decently to the parish poor, and she stood apart from the common mourners. At a proper distance, a lady doing her charitable duty at a pauper's grave. 6 feet of open frozen ground lay between her and the girl who knew everything. The 2 of them did not look at one another. They did not need to. They stood on either side of the grave of the woman only they had loved, and they said nothing, and that nothing was the last verse of the only language the 3 of them had ever shared. By the graveside Mr. Peel fell to talking with the churchwarden, and could not help himself, and said, loud enough to carry, that it was as well the business was ended. For the Friday penny had been a piece of heathen foolery from the first, a charm, the sort of low superstition the parish was better rid of. Mrs. Suckling straightened up from the graveside where she had bent to drop in her handful of earth. She was an old woman, and she did not care much any longer what curates thought of her. "That were no charm, Reverend," she said, plainly, loud enough for those near to hear, which was most of them. "That were a mother and her girl." Mr. Peel's mouth opened. It shut again. He looked round the ring of faces, the Almshouse folk and the mourners. All of them turned to him now, and he found nothing in any of them to help him. Whatever Mrs. Suckling meant by it, and he did not fully know, he understood at least that he had been small at a graveside, and that everyone had seen it. The colour went up his neck. He looked down at his book, and he mumbled the rest of the words, and he did not raise his eyes again until the earth was filled in. And on the far side of the grave, apart, alone, in her good cloak, a lady stood very still, and looked at the ground, and grieved in the only way she was ever allowed to grieve, silently, and at a distance, and under another woman's name. The inquiry sat the week of Lady Day, and it did not last the morning. Mr. Peel laid his evidence. Concealed income, he said, money passing in secret to a woman on the parish, and when the board asked him to produce this money, this coin that had so troubled the parish, there was only the one thing to produce, for it had been recovered from the girl who kept the Almshouse errands, and it lay now on the green baize of the table before Edmund Vane and the assembled guardians. A penny. Dark, worn thin, a nail-hole bored clean through the middle of it. Mr. Vane picked it up. He turned it over. He put a thumbnail to the hole. "This is your concealed income, Mr. Peel?" he said. "It passed weekly, sir, for 2 years by the accounts." "It is spoilt," said Mr. Vane. "It is a penny with a hole in it. No tradesman in the county would take it across a counter." He set it down. There was a low sound round the table that was very nearly laughter, the dry laughter of practical men who have had their morning wasted. "You have brought us a farthing's worth of nothing, sir, and a dead woman, and asked us to strike a corpse from the rolls." He pushed the coin back across the bays. The relief was £0.50 a week to a pauper past 70 who could not walk to market. "There is no income here. There is no case here. The matter is closed." And that was the end of Mr. Peel's zeal. It was noted against him, quietly, in the way such things are noted among men who sit on boards, that the young curate had been hasty and self-seeking, and had troubled his betters over a hold penny and a folk custom he had not troubled to understand. He was not thanked. He was not advanced. He learned, slowly, that the parish had taken his measure at a graveside, and he grew quieter after that. The curate no longer preached on pennies. Esther Coe kept her hens and her cottage. She had been kind before there was ever a coin, and she had never spent a farthing of anything, and she asked for nothing at the end of it, and she got nothing that she asked for. But other things came, without a name attached to them. When Michaelmas came round again, and Esther went with her small hoard to pay the £3 10 a year that fell due, she was told, to her bewilderment, that the year's rent stood settled already, paid by a hand the agent was not at liberty to name. And there began, that same season, a standing order at fair market price. So many eggs a week, bought regular, for the Almshouse, at a good honest penny the going rate, so that never again could any Friday gift of Esther's be mistaken for charity she could not afford, nor mark her out as a girl with means to be struck off. It was done so that giving would look like trade. It was done so that she would be safe. Esther knew whose hand it was. She said nothing. She wore the penny on its ribbon at her throat, under her collar, and she went on. That was in the spring of 1871, and the year turned and turned again. By the spring of 1873, Wrenholt had a new benefaction. It was read out in the vestry and praised, and there is a stone for it still. The Merrow bequest, endowed publicly and handsomely by Mrs. Honoria Vane of the Big House, for the comfort of the aged poor of the Almshouse, coal in winter and meat of a Sunday, and a small pension above the parish £0.50 for those past 70. A fine thing, a named thing. Her name is cut into the stone above the Almshouse door, where anyone may read it, and the vestry thanked her warmly and thinks well of her for it to this day, and never once has guessed why a lady of her station should trouble herself so particularly over that one poor house, and over the memory of one blind old woman buried in the pauper's corner, with no stone at all. And on a Friday at dusk, with the light going gold and then grey over the strip behind her cottage, Esther Coe still sets out one egg on a window-sill that no longer needs it. Her 4 hens have gone up to roost. The ribbon lies at her collar, with the hold penny warm against her skin. There is no old woman waiting now, and no lady coming in the dark, and the coin never travels any more. But she sets the egg out all the same, wrapped in its scrap of clean rag, for habit and for the dead, and because some answers a person goes on giving long after there is anyone left to receive them. For here is the whole of it. Plainly, there were 2 charities in Wrenholt. One was announced in the vestry and praised by name and cut into stone, and it fed the bodies of the poor, and will be remembered as long as the stone stands. The other was never spoken once in all its years. It was only ever an egg on a sill, and a penny in the dark, and it said one thing only. From a daughter to a mother, and from a mother to a daughter, I heard you. I am here. And of the 2, though only one has a name on it, that silent one was the truer. So think, before you go. There is a kindness somewhere in your own life that no one was ever allowed to name out loud. A penny in the dark, a word never said, that meant everything. Whose small silent answer are you still carrying, and have you ever, even once, set out the egg? Tell me where you're listening from, and tell me their name if you can bear to. Some of them never got to hear it said.